Government spending is way up, but that's not what's causing inflation. Imagine your old buddy Josh is going through his email and he sees this right here over at First Trust Advisors, right here. Government spending is way up, but that's not what's causing inflation, part one. I was stunned to see this because I've been saying this for freaking years. And Brian Wesper, I got it's better than you think. I got a couple books by him back there. Huge fan of Wesper, and he's been arguing about inflation for a long, long time. But I haven't heard him making this explicit of a case. What causes inflation isn't what we think it is. This must be the way. When you start connecting dots on various things that you know have been previously heterodoxy to a challenge, if you know what I'm saying about various things our government has done, imagine like the conspiracy theorists that are sitting there thinking people are starting to see the light. People are starting to see the light. It must feel great. You know, like, was the FBI involved in Oklahoma City? Was the FBI involved in JFK? Various other conspiracy, what we thought were previously conspiracy theorists, and people were like, they're getting it. It must just the same way I feel right here. When I read this by Brian Wesper, I was like, holy crap. All right, so we're going to read this. I'll put you a link to the show, to the video for you can watch yourself. But government spending is way up, inflation is way up, but correlation is not causation. And no matter how many times people say it, government spending does not cause inflation. I cannot. I'm so just blown away that Brian Westbury is saying this against all economic orthodox. This is incredible to me. This is like the beginning of the 2022 is 2022 is going to kick ass. When the government takes from Pauline through borrowing or taxation to pay Peter, money moves from one pocket to another, but no new money is created. I don't know about that. When they borrow, you're creating money. Now, he would say, you're not really creating money, you're just borrowing against the future. Well, yeah, but you're still creating money that previously did not exist. I mean, you are literally creating money out of the air. The idea that we have to pay it back, I'll prove to you that's silly, and it's never going to be paid back. So you are literally creating money. So what Westbury is arguing is we live in this vacuum. There's a fixed amount of dollar bills. You're either getting it through taxation or borrowing. And if you're taking it from Pauline, either via taxation or borrowing, that's still a fixed amount. I mean, it's kind of like there's a fixed amount of electrons in the universe, right? How many are being moved from point A to point D to create electricity? Well, you're not moving, subtracting, or increasing the number of electrons. That's a vacuum. That's kind of what Westbury is arguing here with money, but it's simply not true. You are literally creating money out of the air because you're injecting money into the economy that will never be paid back. I mean, it's literally how I'm surprised he sees that. But anyway, taking money from savers and investors and redistributing it to spenders instead hurts production in the future. I completely agree with that. It's a headwind to economic growth, 100%. It's deflationary. Government debt is inherently deflationary because it takes productive people and it makes them to basically say we got to pay more because of your ability to produce. You're going to have to pay more. It reduces their ability to produce, and on top of that, it takes the productive people away from buying and accumulating further assets as well. Debt is deflationary. That's all there is to it. Debt is deflationary. All right. So he's going to say. So I'll put the link in the show notes for you can watch your. Excuse me, I got a little bit of cough here. Brian talking about this. Then there's another part 2 which I haven't seen yet, which will come out. What causes inflation? All right. So when we all start saying, well, debt is causing inflation, I just want to just chuckle. So let's look at this here. So remember, first and foremost, we got to remember debt is the accumulation of deficits. So let's start with this, deficits. Deficits year by year. Deficits is the amount that we have borrowed, not the accumulated debt, the amount that we have borrowed in which to pay the bills. So in 2020, we have projected $3.3 trillion deficit, which is on top of 2019, which is $960 billion, on top of 2018, which is $779 billion. All of these things add up: 3.3 plus 0.9 plus 0.7 plus 0.6 plus 0.5. All of these things add up to the current level of debt. All right, so just think about your credit card. I just went to the store. You bought a credit card for $100. That's $100 that the bank is loaning you, all right, that you don't have. If you had $100 of debt already and you added $100 of credit card, that's a deficit. Now you have $200 of total debt. You had $100 going into this year. You added $100 of deficit spending, i.e. borrowing, and now you got $200 of total debt. The next year, you add another $100 of debt, i.e. deficit, because you don't have enough income to pay your cash flows, and now you got $300. In fact, in my book, Strategic Money Planning, right here, I talked about how this accumulates to the point that it puts you at some point, the bank won't let you spend deficit spending anymore. They say you have too much debt. We're not going to allow you to deficit spend. And as such, that's when you're going bankrupt. All right, now the federal government will never go deficit. We'll never go bankrupt, ever. So you can see, let's go back to 1970, right here. I was born in 1970. $2.8 billion deficit. $2.8 billion. The next year, 1971, $23 billion. 1969, we had a surplus. Notice you're not going to see any other surpluses until right here, under the second Clinton presidency with the Republicans in control of the House and Senate. That's it. That's it. And notice we had 70, 69, 125, 236, and 128. So we have, let's just say that's $500 of budget deficit surpluses. All right, well, that got dwarfed just right here, 92, 93, 94. I mean, we were running perpetual debts on top of debts. The deficits continue to add to the debt. We've had in my life, we've had 4 surplus years, that's it. And since 1969, we have had 5 surplus years. $3.2 billion in 1969, accumulated about a $500 billion or so from 1998 to 2001. And all the, look at that, $1.4 trillion deficit. This is when we thought for sure, right there, that we're going to have high interest rates, massive amount of inflation. And we didn't. $1.3 trillion deficit. A deficit is just the addition to the debt. All right, so hang tight. Remember that the actual the deficit itself is somewhat secondary because it matters what the size of the budget is, the size of the government. So just because in 1969 we had a 1970 had a $2.3 billion deficit, that doesn't mean a huge amount until we look at it in relation to the overall economy. It's kind of like if you have, just for simplicity, if you have a $100,000 line of credit, all right, you have if you have $100,000 of income, that's probably look at it, and you have a $100 deficit. You went to the Publix and you just bought some meat and you got a $100 deficit. We have $100,000 of income. You can easily pay that $100 deficit without question. It's not gonna, it's no skin off your back. If you have a $100 deficit on top of your $500 of debt from accumulated deficits before, you have $600 of total debt, but you have $100,000 of income. Just not a big deal. It's just a drop in the bucket. And that's why you got to think about deficits relative to the size of the economy. That's what matters. So if you look at 1970, we had I think it was a $2-3 billion deficit. And you can see relative to GDP, I wonder if we can click on that. It will allow me to see what the percent was. Yeah, right there. All right, sweet. There we go. Yeah, nice. All right, cool. We can see in 1970, right there, the deficit was 0.26% of the entire budget. All right, that's it. I mean, that's basically a surplus, essentially. So that's a $100,000 income, a $100 deficit. That's just no big deal. All right, so now we go to, here's the surpluses right here. You can see negative deficits or positive surpluses. Here's the Reagan years from 1980 going. Oh yeah, by the way, look at this. From 1967, we had 1% deficit. We go to 1968, 2.67. 1970, basically breaking even. 1971, 2% federal deficit, 1% federal deficit. But remember what's happening during these years of 1970s to 1980s. What was happening? We had massive inflation. Isn't that interesting? I mean, it's just proof right there, man. That's all you see. You had massive inflation in the U.S., and yet from 1970 to 1982, right here, 1982, we had a federal deficit of 3.83%. That's it. 3.83. 1981, we had a federal deficit of 2.4% relative to GDP. That's freaking nothing. And we had huge inflation here. Stop saying government spending is what leads to inflation. You're being led the wrong way. You're being lied to by the Keynesians, which is what they want you to think. Anyway, so 19. Look at this. So now Reagan is ramping up Star Wars and all that as well. He should have. He's ramped up military spending. I don't know anymore. Actually, I don't know anything anymore about. All my belief system's been shot to all hell. So whatever. Come on, you can do it. Come on, come on, you can do it. Come on, Pablo. There you go. Come on, come on, you can do it, Pablo. There you go. Look, there we go. All right. So now what we see is we go back in here, and these are the Clinton-Reagan years from 1981 until basically when Republicans took over right there in 94. Massive amounts of deficit spending relative to historical norms. Before, this is what, World War One, right here, World War II right here. But then what happened? From 2000 on, massive amounts of federal deficit spending relative to our GDP. Massive, and yet no inflation. All right, so let's keep going. I want to point out this too. Oh, my goodness, look at this. Annual federal deficit, all right? Actually, I want to go up. I want to show you something here. Oh, wait a second, wait. Accumulated federal debt. All the debt's going to lead to inflation, Josh. Look at accumulated federal debt right at the end of the World War II. We had over 100% debt to GDP. And we went down from 1948 all the way to 1980 right there. No inflation? What? There's no inflation when the debts were going down relative to GDP? The federal amount of debt was being cut relative to GDP as a percentage of GDP. It went from 100 to freaking, what's that, 30%? And yet no inflation? Oh, no, there was inflation. The highest inflation we've ever seen in American history right here. How? How could that be? And then it goes the exact opposite. We're well above 100% debt to GDP in 2020. And again, no inflation. By the way, so we get some snarky guys. You're saying there's no inflation? None inflation like you say, dude. There's no hyperinflation. There's no freaking 13 to 15% year-over-year inflation. It's not 1970s time. It's just not. So stop it. Yes, there's a little bit of inflation. What do you do? The Federal Reserve target is what, 2%? We're going to have a little bit of inflation. But when I say no, I'm saying relatively speaking to what the scaremongers will say. The dollar is going to collapse. I mean, I don't know what more you need to see this. Right here, it's deflationary. Now, again, spending is deflationary. Debt is deflationary. I mean, think about your own pocketbook. If you have a $100,000 line of credit, and you've been spending that like a freaking drunken sailor. Now you wake up one day and you have $100,000 line of credit is max. What does that mean? That you cannot spend another $100,000 going forward. Inherently, it's deflationary. You're not going to consume because you have to pay this off. It's just that simple. Spending is deflationary. Debt is deflationary. Please understand that. There's no two ways around this. The proof is in the freaking numbers, man. And the only way people argue against it is they're Keynesians. And Keynesians are basically broadly socialist, by the way. They want to trick you into saying, oh, man, we can just spend. And you can, absolutely. But the issue is they want you to spend while they're cutting back on energy production. That is massive, massive stagflation. You got the inflation on one side, but no growth on the other to accommodate. That's where they get you in the fiefdoms that they want. Stand up against these fools. All right, we'll see you.